we're going to talk about how to navigate negotiating not just your salary, but the perfect work package, I guess, your perfect job offer. And we have a few people who will be speaking, but also listening while speaking. The way this is going to go is we're going to start with talking about why you should negotiate, what you should and shouldn't do, and what you should consider, and also get into some scenarios and allow some people to ask questions about their own scenarios, if you feel comfortable, because we're recording this. So just FYI, if you are not comfortable sharing your name, feel free to DM Black Tides, but you can also request to speak. So I am a data generalist, and I'm more interested in data engineering and analytics at this point of my career. I've been working for about almost 7 years in data, but maybe 2 in tech and data, because data is not necessarily tech, but that's a story for another day. And for me, I see negotiating anything a little bit different. There's a small added dimension because I am also a non-resident immigrant. So money is not always the only thing I'm looking for when negotiating. And so I'll talk about that. We also have with us our co-founder, Kim, who is AKA the host. She is our co-founder. She's a chemical informaticist and a bunch of other things. And we're gonna have her also speak and share her experiences with over 30, I wanna say, or 25. I don't want to like tell your age, but she has a lot of experience in data and in just negotiating in life. So I will start this off by asking you, Auntie Kim, as we like to call you, why would someone negotiate? Because this last week has been a lot of that conversation, but what exactly would you go into a conversation with the mindset of negotiating?
Good evening, everyone. And I actually don't mind if, the age thing. I am 50 fine, not 55. Thank you very much. But getting back to the question, before I get to the question, actually, if there's anyone who wants to be a speaker and share some stories, if there are anyone that is from Human Resources, we definitely love to hear you join in as a speaker and share your thoughts. But to answer the question, it's pretty obvious. We want to increase the bag, increase the line. I think one of the most important things, and I was posting a series of tweets about it and to add some more. There's a lot of key things that you need to do when you negotiate, but the why is mostly because the number that you are given is often the bare minimum whoever is offering it to you thinks that they can get away with. And I would say that if someone gives you a number and you say, we need to have some more conversations around money, and they say, no, I'm not willing to negotiate, you ought to walk away unless you are in a really tight situation and just need to have the job. So the very obvious reason is because you're never offered your worth with that first number. So you want to negotiate, and negotiating can, show up in many different ways. It could be salary, it could be more days off, it could be, PTO, it could be bonus, it could be promotions within 90 days. There's any number of things that you can negotiate. It could be, 100% working remote, whatever you think is valuable that's around the, conversation about work can be negotiated. So that's the why. So we have a number of other members of Black Ties that are here. Is there anyone else from Black Ties that would like to answer the why question? Or actually, is there anyone in general that would like to answer the why? You want to contribute to the conversation? Feel free to, ask to be a speaker, and then I will allow you to speak.
Thank you. And like you touched on, a lot of it has to do with where you are in life. Something I will say is so I'm from an East African culture, and it's very communal. Everybody eats, but in a way that there is a gospel truth and then there is everybody else's truth. And so that can lead to a kind of submissive way of approaching conversations that might be difficult. And so it takes a lot of unlearning to say, well, yeah, this I can still be nice to my community. I can still care about all of us getting what we are worth, but me, like put some in your pocket. And that's something a lot of us have to learn how to do.
And see, that's a really good point, because when you speak about cultural, and I think that as a Black woman, I think people aren't expecting me to negotiate. So that's an example of where the cultural difference can be not necessarily work in your favor, as opposed to being different. It's more lesser than, right? And so sometimes people sometimes I've had situations where people were borderline offended that I knew enough about my worth that I wanted to negotiate my salary. So with that said, you can't negotiate anything unless you know what you're dealing with, right? So what's your education? How many years of experience do you have? One of the more important things you can do in negotiating your salary is you have to know what is the pay, not just for your position, but for where you live. Now, this can be a little tricky because there are a lot of positions out here today. And so what I would say, as an example, in spring of 2021, spring of 2020, I worked at a startup that's based in California. I live in Metro DC, but if I lived in Dubuque, Iowa, I want the California salary. Thank you very much. And I was able to negotiate that. And you justify it with, well, this company is based in California, though it's remote. My expectation is that I'm going to get market value as if I lived in California because you are based in California. And that actually worked for me. So that's just an example of, some of the research you kind of have to do into your position so that you know what your worth is, know about the company, where it's located. There's a lot that you have to do before you even get to the why. You have to get to the what. So what are you negotiating? What's your title? What's your education? What's your experience? All those things are going to play into how you negotiate that number. So I'm going to unmute Dr. Jones, who would like to add to the conversation. Go ahead, Dr. Jones.
Also, a quick plug for Dr. Jones, who is, you should plug yourself. You wrote this research paper, which I could not get past the first, like the abstract. Does not have to do with salary, but it's very brilliant. So please tell us.
Hi, everybody. So my name's Giera Jones. I am a research fellow at the National Cancer Institute, and I do molecular epidemiology, cancer health disparities epidemiology, and I'm a member of Black Tides. And I just wanted to add a little something to the why you want to negotiate, and it really has to do with also like your salary career trajectory, right? So if you work in spaces like the government or federal space, if you work in health departments or things like that, or which sometimes will have a range, but they also have mechanisms where they can hire you as like a Title 42 or something like that, where you can come in above the GS scale, pay scale. So if you don't negotiate your salary, what that means is if let's say you come in and they pay you less than all of your counterparts and you did not negotiate, for as long as you are in that institution, you will always be at the bottom of that scale, even as you go up in promotions. And so you want to make sure that you're negotiating your worth so that you are, if not among your peers, above your peers. You don't ever want to be the lowest paid in the department. And so I actually learned that in my salary negotiations for my promotion. And had I not done that, I would have been actually the lowest paid person. And a lot of women tend to not negotiate. For whatever reason, we feel like it doesn't come natural to us. And when I kind of shared this with colleagues, they were like, "I'm glad that you negotiated because I would have not only been the lowest paid, but for all subsequent promotions, I would have kind of stayed in that state. So definitely always negotiate your salary."
Thank you for telling that. You hit me of something. Is speaking of culture, also industry versus academia. So professors take, and you probably can, both of you can speak to this, so many years to get promotions just by whoever made up the system before you get from getting to assistant to or to associate. Even if you move institutions, it's not like you can move from one university to another and then change your title. It doesn't always work that way. So being able to like figure out the scale is very important because there's fewer things you can negotiate. Um, but where was I going with that? I don't know. I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's an important point too, and there are ways to get around that. So, for example, a lot of public universities, they make their salaries for professors public, so you can look and see what assistant professors or full professors are making at public universities. At private institutions, that's a little bit more, well, that's not publicly available. So you would try to either you could talk to, if you're in an academic institution, you could talk to like department chairs at your institution because they kind of have an idea a lot of times. Or if you know people, like you got to kind of network, and maybe somebody can give you an idea of what a good range is. Um, so that one's a little bit more tricky, but there's definitely ways. And what I will say is it really depends on the institution, right? Because if you go to a big research one institution, they pay pretty well, and then they do other, they have other ways to incentivize you coming to their university. I've heard of universities paying child care, private school. Like if it's a real big institution like the Harvard and they pull some tricks out of the woodworks. So it's definitely ways to negotiate in academia.
Thank you for sharing that. So we were kind of, that's a kind of a good segue because we were talking about, you know, your research and what you should look into. And I'd like to hear from you both, if you're comfortable sharing, how you would approach it. Like if somebody would say, okay, I know you told me I did all my research, I did all these things, and now I have to go into the room and talk to this person. What's my script? How do you approach that?
So since I did it earlier today, I'll weigh in. I think you have to avoid using the word money, and you definitely have to avoid using negative words. Like you can't say I really think you're lowballing me here. I deserve X, Y, and Z. I think the best way to start that conversation is to start, if it's a one-on-one situation, like say with your supervisor, or you're going into a company, you start with everything you're bringing to the table before you ever mention anything about money. So you talk about your education, you can talk about your projects, you can talk about any KPIs you fulfill for the company that were, really outstanding. You gas yourself up so that when you get ready to say, and I think that, and again, I never use the word money. Excuse me, the phraseology I use is, I think based on what I just said, that warrants a conversation about increased compensation and benefits. And that's the way I put that particular situation. So I'm curious to see how other people approach that. Again, for me, it's kind of the sandwich technique. I start with all the great things, and then I'll say something about, compensation, then I'll may wrap it up with, and just to fall back on the fact that I had the highest number of sales for whatever, right? So I love the sandwich technique for that. That's a good place. So to hype yourself, you use the word compensation or benefits increase, and then you do a little teeny tiny bit of hyping up on the back end. Love to hear how other people handle that though.
Andrea, welcome. Andrea's also part of Black Ties. I will let you go since you joined.
Andrea, can you unmute yourself?
Hello, what's happening? What was the question again?
How would you approach the conversation of actually outlining your, what is your negotiation tactic? Like, literally, how would you do it?
I feel like it's something I still need to work on. Probably mostly similar to what Kim said. I do anything different. I guess maybe talk about like how your skills will benefit the employer and just kind of stress that and not focus so much on how much money they're going to pay me right away. But just really show how hiring you will be beneficial to the employer and hype yourself up, but not talk about money too much. And then also just think about your benefits beyond salary, maybe like getting extra PTO time or what else? I know when I worked at UCLA, some of the doctors there were getting their houses paid for by the university because they wanted them that badly. So just think about think about how you'll benefit them, and just really express that, and just think about what you really need out of the job, and see if they'll meet it.
I like that. I'm gonna wait until the end. Dr. Jones, do you have something to say about this?
Sure. So I would agree with Kimberly and Andrea that you so I found myself in those situations when I was negotiating promotions within the company, right? You kind of like give them an idea of what you've done, remind them what you've done, and then you start the salary negotiations kind of there. But for companies outside of where you currently work, um, I've approached it a little bit differently where I kind of do my homework and understand like the job position, like what's and how that matches up with what I currently have, and then what the typical ranges are from there. And again, I get that information from online and from networking and talking with individuals who may be like at that company or a similar company with a similar job title. And then I ask them what they felt was a fair range. And people are very, very honest, will tell you their exact salary, and other people will give you a range, but that kind of gives you a starting point where now you have an idea of, okay, well, what is my reach number? Or at least this is the way I organize it. What's your number? What's my, I'm worth this? And what's my bare minimum? I would not accept this at all, or I wouldn't accept anything below this. And then when I have these conversations, I always tell the company, which a lot of times is true, that I have competing offers. And so, like, I did have a conversation with one company at one point, and they asked me my number, and I tried to like, throw it back to them, like, oh well, what is the range of the position? And they were like, oh well, could you just give me an idea of so they kind of threw it back to me, and I said, okay, well, here's the range that I'm looking at within, and I gave them a ballpark figure, and they responded like, oh well, that is a little bit outside of what we were able to offer, but let me kind of go back to my manager, and so I let them go back to their manager, and they have to come up. So I don't know, it's a little bit of a game, right? But you have to have a really good idea of what your worth is within that space, and so you have to kind of do your homework.
Thank you. I also want to say hello to O'Dane, who just joined us as a speaker. He is responsible for our podcast, which if you would like to learn about a varied amount of topics. I mean, he speaks with people in industry, people in academia, what I wish I knew when I was in college, with Jared, who's also here. So all of the above, if you would like to listen, and also hello, Odane.
Hey, Sia. Hey, everyone. So, like Sia mentioned, my name is Odane, and I run the podcast for Black Tides. I also recently switched. I wouldn't say switch, but made a lateral move career wise, where I was working for a health insurance company, and I switched to working for the government. So I recently had to go through, a negotiation process, and I just want to plus one what Dr. Jones mentioned, where when you're working in government, whatever you choose, that's your starting point. And in terms of negotiating from that standpoint, you want to make sure that you're starting, a little bit higher, because you're going to be kind of like locked into that bracket. It was my experience was a little overwhelming, because I had did my research. I even put together like a sort of like a negotiation template, where I was gonna remove whatever offer they put, and then fill in the offer that I wanted, and list out the scales that I had, and because I thought it was gonna be through like email, but it wasn't, and so I had to scrap that idea. And I was on the call with my current supervisor, and how it works in government is I was presented a sort of like a Excel spreadsheet, and it was range from like letter A through letter M, I believe. And so I just saw all these numbers thrown at me, and she was just like, "Okay, where do you think you?" So I had to sort of like come up with a sort of like a strategy of where I would place myself. Obviously, I didn't want to place myself at, um, M or L, because I didn't want to, what's the word, overcompensate. I don't know if that's the word, but that's what I'm gonna go with. I didn't want to like kind of like hype up my skills to where, okay, now I'm coming in. How do I sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? How do I justify, asking for max? So I didn't want to put myself into that position. But I think what it came down to is just being honest with yourself, being honest with your skills. If you think that you are let's say you're a mid-level developer, I don't think that I don't think that, or let's use another example. Let's say you're just entry-level developer. I don't think that asking for senior salary would be sort of like wise, because you're fresh into the industry. It all depends. And so where I kind of so with me, I just put myself in the middle, because I'm like, okay, like I just graduated like a year ago. I'm not gonna ask for the max, because I know, like, you got to live in your truth, and I know I'm not like the max salary cap, so I'm not gonna go in asking for max. But I also don't want to lowball myself, right? So in the end, I just went with the letter that was closer to the number that I had in my head. And similar to what a lot of the other speakers mentioned, sometimes you can have that open and honest conversation and say, so where do you think I fall based on the interview, based on my resume? You spoke with me. Where do you think I fall? And so when she placed me at a certain, let's say at a certain letter, I just went like two letters up above what she said, right? That way I kind of like have established my baseline. I also want to end by saying it also depends on who you're talking to, right? Because a lot of times companies will have recruiters do the salary portion of it, but they don't really have much control. Um,
Can everyone hear me? I truly hope.
Yep.
Hey, I was going to say Twitter crash again.
So is it ordained that we can't hear? I was about to say my Android phone is done.
Oh, I guess I should have landed my plane. So yeah, so the last piece of what I had mentioned was, it depends on who you're speaking to directly. A lot of times, if you're working with a recruiter, the recruiter doesn't really have any control with what you actually get. It's the hiring manager. But a lot of times, the hiring managers are hidden behind a sort of like a gate, and you can't really get your offer to them directly to go back and forth. So a lot of times, recruiters or even sometimes managers and supervisors play a sort of like a middleman role. So the person that you actually want to speak to, you actually never, sometimes you don't get to speak to that person. So it can make negotiating a little tricky at times. And I'm going to end my plane there.
Thank you, Ordain. Jared, I see you unmuted.
Hello. Hey everyone. So my name is Jared. I'm on the executive committee for Black Tides. So I definitely have a pretty good perspective, especially because I've actually done the salary negotiation twice within the past 12 months, as well as kind of learn from past mistakes and kind of learn some tips and tricks. So first in full context, I used to work for some of the large banks. Worked with one of them until May of 2019. Left that for something of a much higher paying role, and then there was some issues with that. With that team, that's an entirely other discussion. And then I've actually recently accepted a new position a few weeks ago. So I pretty much am pretty fresh new with a recent salary negotiation process. But coming from me, I used to be someone who did not really have the confidence to really feel like I should negotiate what my worth and everything. So, for example, I worked at this one place called Genpack, and there it was kind of a here is the salary number. We will not be going above this number, but if you would like to take the job, you will take the salary. And I'm taking it. Realized that one that was a whole ass mistake, and you should never. First of all, that in itself is a red flag. There are companies that do that. Don't ever fall into that. And then two, after I left, when I was leaving there, I was in a very toxic work environment. So this is back in 2019. I ended up not negotiating because I really wanted to get out of my current work place. So I ended up taking pretty much the one of the lowest salaries that I could have potentially taken for that role. And in the end of the day, I do not regret it because I learned some things and I was still able to get out of that environment. But it realized a few things. One, you need to also account for what if your role grows, because within the 2 years I worked for this one particular bank, I had not seen so I'd only seen very small pay increases, which in itself really didn't show much. And when my role in way kind of grew in terms of responsibilities, and I'd be leading over projects and processes and other things, because I had taken the lower salary, I was almost in a way underpaid for what I was doing. Hence why I left there. One of the things that I've learned one of the things I've learned is being exposed to a site called Glassdoor.com. That is a really good site because one is you can be able to see reviews of the company. So you can already see if a company's toxic before you even accept an offer from that company. That's an entire other conversation we can have on that. But and then the other thing is they also have a salary section where real life employees, both past or former, full time, part time, contractor, whatever, can be able to submit salaries for the job that they have or had. And with that, it actually brings a degree of transparency that many companies will not give you, which is you can see in real time how much people are earning. And with that, you can also use that as a based on to see, okay, what is realistically a number that you could be earning with that company. Then you also need to match it up with similar jobs of similar companies within your same metropolitan region, and a lot of times you can see, okay, this job may pay higher than comparable jobs. This may pay lower than comparable jobs, so on and so forth. And that's a really important thing. Now, fast forwarding into 2021 into 2022, I what was it? I departed from my most recent team and was pretty much on the job market for about a week or a little bit over a week. When I received the offer for this role, I realized that one, I actively impressed them through the interview, because you need to realize you need to sometimes gas yourself up in the mirror, and realizing how good you are, and realize I impressed everyone during the interview process. I have great credentials. They love the fact that in addition to industry, I'm also an active professor as well. I've had some publications in the past. And I bring a lot to the table. And I realize, and I want you guys to realize this as well. I bring a lot to this table, and you're going to pay for what I'm bringing into the table. And then with that, I realized, one, doing research of what comparable roles of comparable industries, and then take a certain percentage, increasing that as kind of a bonus as to this is what I'm bringing into the table. Oftentimes, you may have one of the things I've learned is oftentimes you may have like your minimum amount, which can be either the amount that you currently earn or something slightly lower depending on your financial situation or job situation. A what I call the modest increase, and then what I would call the more aspirational increase. You want to be able to think about that aspirational increase, and so long as it's relatively realistic, especially consulting with Glassdoor, so everything. So ultimately, in the end of the day, there's a lot of things you can there's a lot of resources out there. One of them definitely being Glassdoor. You can be able to see a lot of salaries. So I'll kind of land my plane there. If anyone else wants to add to that.
Thank you, Jared. So hey, Hannah, welcome. Hannah's also a member of Black Ties.
Hi,
So
Sia. Hi, everyone.
hello. Would you like to talk about this topic, or did you want to talk about something before that?
Sure, I can say, so I'm currently a data analyst, but I work more on the government public health side. So this is an area that I'm not the most skilled in, to be honest. So I was more going to put out a question of like the area that I struggle with. I've had interviews over the past, year, just like recruiters reaching out and speaking with them. And I've noticed I've had trouble getting salary ranges from them. I would usually, they would ask me what salary I'm interested in, and then I would kind of try to pivot the conversation back to the salary they have provided for the position. And then they would kind of shut me down and say, like, we don't provide that information. And so I've been a little frustrated that I kind of have to like take a shot at the dark. Like Jarrett said, I do use, websites like Glassdoor and things like that, but in certain positions, there's not as much data I found. So in those circumstances, I do kind of want to figure out, the salary range for the specific position I'm interested in. And so I'm just wondering, are there strategies to kind of get recruiters to open up about that? Or does that just mean, it's a red flag and you shouldn't work for that company? I'd be curious to hear what other people think.
Can I respond real quick? So like, what kind of company is like, what type of company is it?
So I'm in the Washington DC metropolitan area, so it would be a lot of different like consulting firms, and then a lot of smaller companies that don't have as much data on Glassdoor. So yeah, just basically anybody in the DC area that reaches out in LinkedIn and kind of just talking to them about the position and whatnot. But mainly, I'd say smaller companies is the ones that I've had trouble.
Okay. I know for me in the past, like I've contacted employees that have used to work at some places, maybe not current employees, and I figured usually they're more open about what their salary was when they were working at whatever place. So sometimes I've done that before, just for salary research. And then also sometimes I look at other websites besides Glassdoor. What I think I tweeted some on my Twitter page, but there's like I guess it depends on what company it is, but there's different ways to get the salary data sometimes. It just depends on what exactly the company is and where you then that probably determines where you can find the information. So I'm not sure if that was helpful, but
Thank you, Andrea. So Hannah, I think it's first of all, it's not you. And then secondly, I agree with reaching out to employees, former employees. Also, second connections on LinkedIn. We don't, I mean, most of the time people connect on LinkedIn and you have a first connection and you're like, okay, I can DM this person. But second connections are really helpful in that if you see you want to work somewhere and then you search and find that, okay, a second connection of mine is working at this place. Try to reach out to the first connection and say, hi, I noticed you connected to this person. I would like to ask them this question because I'm looking at applying there. And it's very non-committal because you are not really connected to the second person. So it's very transactional. I don't know how to say that nicely, but like nobody's playing around and trying to make friends. Also, something you could do is ask them for the budget or say, and this is from Mark Thompson says this sometimes, it's like, don't worry about the number, let's just talk and see if we have a fit. Because then that forces them to realize, okay, I'm either gonna waste my time talking with this person and then they're gonna tell me a number and I'm not gonna like it as a recruiter, or I can tell them now and move on to other candidates. So you can play too. You can play hardball too and not give the number and still be polite.
Yeah, thanks, Sia. I think that makes sense. That's kind of where I was starting to lean. I'm starting to lean on the side of it's more of a red flag for me if they're not open with this information and kind of just, looking elsewhere.
Hannah, I want to add a different, maybe not a different, but just add something to the conversation about negotiating with contractors. I found it to be the most frustratingly difficult thing in the world. I also live in Metro DC. I've also worked in the area as a data scientist. And so in those particular cases, it's definitely a red flag. However, when you go into the conversation, when you know what your range should be, if they haven't said anything about the range, and maybe this is because I'm a little further along in my career, I'll just say, I'm looking at a range of this. Does that meet the expectations of what you're willing to compensate for this position? Because at some point you could really go back and forth indefinitely on LinkedIn and they never mention salary at all, which is definitely a red flag. But if you really want to, cut to the chase after a couple of back and forths and they still haven't mentioned it, you could say, well, kind of based on the market, my background and experience, I'm looking at a salary in this particular range. Is that what your organization is? Is your organization open to that level of compensation? Notice again, I don't use the word money. And that's probably the way I would approach it if it's an organization you're really interested in working in. Otherwise, I might just, take it as a red flag and move on. So I just wanted to add that comment.
Thank you. I see And I like that too because I do that sometimes. It depends. I guess it depends how much you want to work there. That's yeah. Well, hello.
Yes. Hey, good afternoon. How's it going?
Good afternoon to you. Good evening to
Abs-
us. We're on.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Go ahead.
First and foremost, I just want to say, what an amazing space to be able to discuss something that's so taboo and that many of us have troubles discussing and just figuring out, really feasible, really sustainable, and really like, accurate or really, really high chances of being able to approach this conversation. My approach is twofold. It's both internal and external. So if you're currently working for a company and you're looking to negotiate for a higher salary, I kind of take a much more tactical approach. I'm very aware of what my personal development plan is, what KPIs have I met. These are tangible things that I could bring to the table. I think this resembles what Kimberly had mentioned. I bring those things to the table and I also show about what was expected of me and where I achieved. So basically, it's like, hey, this is a scale, this is a spectrum, and this is how I exceeded that. And I always believe that always puts things in perspective when you're able to see, hey, this is what they expected of you, and this is how you exceeded that. So for me, right there, that lets me know that I do have somewhat of a leg up because I outperform what I was supposed to do by a landslide. So that's one of my techniques for negotiating is always being mindful of what is expected of me. What does success look like? Parameters for doing a good job, doing a great job, doing an outstanding job. So those are all the things that I would do from an internal standpoint. I think it makes the conversation much easier on your hand, and it's very, very, very safe. And always too, in both internal and external situations, you always have the upper leg. Upper leg is that you could just say no, right? Like you don't have to take this job, you don't have to do anything. So always be mindful of that. Like you do have the power. Nobody saying, hey, you might not be happy, but guess what? It might not be your time. You might have to go back to the lab, continue to study, continue to skill up, and then circle back in this conversation. So when it comes to external, my approach is basically based upon obviously your experience. I think you have to take a hard look at yourself in the mirror. You kind of have to assess where you at if your skills. I'm speaking more so to the data analysts, data scientists, data engineer space, because that's what I work in. But let's just say if I'm a senior data analyst and I'm looking to go in and negotiate a salary, well, I'm going to look at my cap as that of a data scientists, and maybe my median is more so that of a junior data scientist. So therefore, that kind of have like an idea of that range, and based upon the company that I'm going to, what is their tech stack, what is my experience with their tech stack, that gives me kind of an idea of how much wiggle room I do have, and then to top that off, how well I perform on the assessment that I may have. And I think that a lot of times once you take the test, you kind of have this feeling of how well you performed. And I think those are always good negotiating tactics. For myself personally, I try to always give myself 15 to 18% above always what they're asking, just because I'm always going to shoot my shot for more. And I also know that there's always wiggle room on their end, but a lot of times people don't engage in that conversation. So, you know, that they don't have to even go there. So at the end of the day, when it comes to internal, be mindful of what your professional development plan is, what are your KPIs, how did you perform? And when it comes to external, be mindful of where you're at, where you're trying to get to. You could do some of the research about where are some of your counterparts in the same positions, where are they going? And also your biggest separator is going to be these three things. And this is for external. Your three separators was going to distinguish you from other people. Number one is your skill set and how you're able to apply them to the specific company that you're going to, right? You might have some companies who are Microsoft based. So you better know how to use Azure. You better know how to use SQL Server, or you're going to have companies who are Amazon, so on and so forth. So be mindful of your tech stack aligning with what the company is using. Do you know how to use Tableau better? Oh, we're a Power BI company, so I really don't care about Tableau. So those are things you just kind of have to be mindful of. A second thing you have to be mindful of is uh, how well can you showcase your skill set? Do you have an opportunity to showcase your skills, right? Like if you are, like I said, a senior data analyst and you don't necessarily have an opportunity to take an assessment, are you just going to go out here and say something? Well, guess what? Like you have to prove it to them. So that's not for me to say, oh, I don't believe in anyone. I just think that, hey, I believe in meritocracy. If you can walk the walk, you deserve to get paid. There's no negotiation. That last thing I think is one thing that's underrated. After you've performed well, after you've showcased, wow, like you're worth me paying, don't sleep on the fit, the culture, and the behavioral interview. That's extremely valuable because the fit is going to be everything. Can you continue to grow within that space, right? Is this a space even for yourself? Like, are they watering you?
Thank you.
Thank you
Wait,
for allowing me to have this conversation.
yeah, thank you so much for like framing it in three things and also for touching on the internal part because you also need to be growing once you get the job. And just a reminder, we're not just talking about this is for everyone. We're not just talking about money. We're talking about, to Rose point, professional development. Like, can you negotiate to get more money per year for professional development, depending on the role you are in, once you're in there? Can you get a transportation stipend? Can you, well, now remote is not a thing, I mean, it's a thing, but if you had to travel, can you get like pre-check paid for by your company? So like, you can always find something that if you're doing such a great job and it makes your life easier, shoot your shot. Let's see, who else would like to tell us about how they approach this before we go to the next topic? Or ask a question.
I guess I have a question, and maybe it's just so focused on my
Hello.
situation. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Hi. I just said
Oh,
hello.
sorry. I thought my apologies. Right. So, Rel, thank you for the internal talk that kind of like answered half of it. But right now, I'm an intern in a data position in the financial industry, and all signs are pointing to my talks with my supervisor and manager are going to hire me. But it's a position that does not exist in the bank currently. And when I tried doing my research on the background, it's kind of like this Frankenstein data governance manager, data scientist, junior data scientist position. And I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out what I should ask for, especially because I'm early in my career. So if anybody could give some advice or tell me, hey, this is general idea, be appreciated. Or tell me to sit down, it's all cool too.
May I speak on this if it's okay?
Sure.
Sure.
I think that you're in a great position. I think that first and foremost, I'm a glass half full individual, right? I think this is a great opportunity for you to trailblaze a position for the company so that they can be more invested and more curious about what this looks like in that space. I think that what's more important for you right now is to get a clear understanding of what your day to day is going to be, and what technologies will your position or will your company rather be utilizing. I think once they have a clear understanding of that, then you will have a clear understanding of what to compare up against for salary, right? Like if you are, are you creating, managing, sustaining, data pipelines? Are you, presenting in front of business, business partner stakeholders? These are some concrete things that you can kind of start to put together somewhat of a package for you to figure out, okay, based upon these expectations that they have of me, this is what that kind of garners as far as salary is concerned, right? And then also don't forget too, because this is starting in your career, there are other ways in which you can get, things that you want, whether that's, like Sia had just mentioned, whether that's more for professional development for you to skill up. And then now, let's say you skill up in a space of machine learning, and now you're able to even bring that much more value, right? Or if they don't like you there, now you're a much more competitive applicant to other places. So you have to kind of think about, okay, one thing you have on your side is time. Another thing you have on your side of yours is that this is a brand new position. So you can collaborate with them and say, hey, these are the things that, we can utilize. Or if they already have a plan or a vision for themselves, right? You just take note of what they have and you can kind of begin to peruse and look around at other positions that utilize a similar tech stack or have similar expectations so that I can help you frame a healthy compensation package. And remember, it is truly a package because you have, multiple things that are coming in that make up for your overall compensation. I hope that was beneficial for you.
Yeah, it is actually. Thank you.
I want to add a little bit to that. When I heard data governance, the number that immediately came to my mind was 150.
I'm going to
Based
repeat
on
that number.
150.
Okay.
Because data governance that's a lot of responsibility. At least it is in our organization, and they're compensated pretty well. When I see that in the job title, I'm seeing pretty high salary. So even though you're new to the position and they're creating it, and there's going to be a significant amount of work, At this age, I personally don't want to do that again. I shouldn't say that because I currently am on a team that was put together. So we put together the chemical informatics team in our organization. So I'm about to sound like a hypocrite, but my point is that it's a whole lot of work. So between the whole lot of work and the data governance and the data scientists, I think the number is 150. I mean, just that's just what I think. Now, I don't know if anyone else has a number in mind because there's obviously other things that come into play. But you said financial institution, yeah, at least 150 actually. Rel, do you have a take on that? I'm curious.
I think data governance definitely encompasses a lot of work. I think that, I think that's the number to shoot for. I think that what they're going to try to walk you down on is, hey, your lack of experience. Hey, we're giving you an opportunity. And what I believe is going to be significant when they do that, because they will, you're going to have to be able to speak to them confidently and articulately about how you're going to be able to shape this. So essentially, you're going to have to be able to convince them that you're going to be able to create and oversee, this particular space with your expertise, and you have to be showing them that today. But I know for sure they're definitely going to try to lowball you as a result of your experience, because this is a position that requires a lot of work. And I think you just have to be able to how you're going to get the job done and how you're already skilled today and not tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you guys. Wow.
So Sia, do you want to start a conversation since we have kind of an intro there with, is Sia still on? Okay, looks like Sia's dropped off. So I think that since you mentioned lowball, I think that's a perfect opportunity for us to pivot the conversation a little bit. Anyone who's alive and was on Twitter is probably aware of a very popular viral tweet. I think I saw it on a national news channel or national newspaper or something, where and I won't call her name because I understand that unfortunately she is no longer employed with the person she was employed with. So we won't do the pile-on thing tonight. But I do think it's an important conversation to have about what do you do if you find out you've been lowballed. I'd love to hear what some folks have to say about that. I have my own take, but I want to give everybody else an opportunity to how do you handle finding out that you were lowballed? And any of the speakers that want to speak on that can unmute themselves and chat. Or if someone wants to talk about a time they got lowballed and how they dealt with it, that would be a great conversation too.
So I can speak on one of my past experiences. So one of the first banks I worked at was Wells Fargo, and that was a job where I was virtually underpaid. At the time, I didn't realize I was lowballed because I was just trying to get out. But once I realized that I basically left a lot of money on the table, a little bit to the tune of close to a little bit over $20,000 on the table. This is the approach I had, and I do not recommend it. Do not recommend this approach. So this is more of this is what you should not do. I kind of saw it as let me try to work harder to try to get, let's say, a promotion or something about it that I can be able to put myself into a higher position, which will give me more money. That does not necessarily work because just as Dr. Jones had mentioned earlier, if you're pretty much like the lowest paid employee on your team, even that new promotion or that new better salary, even if that money is objectively better than your prior one, you're going to be putting yourself into a situation where you're still going to be lowball compared to if I didn't leave that money on the table. So my advice is, honestly, if you're lowball, do what I eventually did, which is start putting myself on the job market. Honestly, you do not give yourself too much of a loyalty to your companies, because in the end of the day, you need to focus on yourself and honestly just leave. I've been on the job market. I've been at places where their quote unquote budget is small, even though I know how much their company may make. I see that your pay is not competitive, and therefore either this is the amount that I deserve. This is the amount that the average person in Charlotte makes for this role. This is what I bring to the table. If we can do some degree of negotiation, I'm willing to negotiate. But if you're not willing to if you're willing to do this lowball number, and it's just okay, I have 7 other interviews lined up. It'll just be another one. So really know your worth. So if you're on the job market, do not allow people to lowball you. Really do your research. And if you are in a job and you have been lowballed, that's where I would just recommend just finding honestly find a new job because you could easily promote yourself and give yourself a better pay raise by just going to another company. So
Yeah, I think that was outstanding. Um, I definitely don't let anyone lowball you, but I also want to say I think it's also a great opportunity for you to really test yourself out there in the market, right? I think a lot of us have the utmost confidence and belief in ourselves that we deserve the bag, and we don't want to hear anything about that. We ain't trying to negotiate nothing. We want to get paid. But when we go and interview and we hear a number that's underwhelming, I think it's an opportunity, right, for us to step back and say, let me go and test the market and see what my value is based upon the market, right? That's not your ultimate value, but let's see if I could go ahead and schedule a couple other interviews just to see what some of those numbers are looking like. Uh, and that kind of gives you a good, I guess good range of the moment of positions that you know that you can go out and compete, right? So you can identify where you're at today and say, okay, let me look at some jobs that are somewhat similar to what I do today and see what those ranges are, maybe a little bit bigger. And then you can kind of take a step, maybe up 2 more levels, something that's outrageous. I just recently shot my shot at a job that was like, principal data scientist for Nike. Got invited, did like the second round of technical interviews, and it got too spicy for me. It was too hot to handle, to say the least. But that kind of gave me a good range. I said, okay, I'm not quite there, so from a salary standpoint, that kind of really level set me and know like, okay, these are the spaces that I should be in. I hope that was helpful. I'm saying that when you're lowball, take it as an opportunity to really take a step back and reevaluate. Okay, where am I at as far as my salary is concerned? Don't take that personal, because guess what? That's just one company. There's so many companies. There's so many places you can get a job, and you can get the number you deserve. But also, it's good to go into any interview knowing kind of roughly what your market value is based upon potential offers from other companies or jobs that are pursuing you currently.
Thank you, Earl. That was very well put. I'm going to speak to the lowballing from a perspective as a woman, as a Black woman, and hopefully no one tires me saying that. But the fact of the matter is that Black women make 63 cents on every dollar of a white male. So we're almost at the bottom. I think Native American women actually make a little less than we do. I think 53 cents on the dollar is what I last heard. I think the challenge with when you are lowballed as a Black woman, to me, is that at least in my experiences where I started a position and then I realized I was lowballed, I feel like the level of disrespect that I dealt with was in some way, and I don't know, this could be just my imagination, I don't think it is, but I always felt like the level of disrespect that I endured was tied in some way to the amount that they lowballed me with, right? It was the idea that if you don't think you're that valuable, then we don't think you're that valuable either, kind of thing. Not just with the money, but in terms of how I was treated. And so I'm curious to some of the ladies that are listening tonight, if you've been lowballed, did you also get a sense of that? You want to share your story? If you want to, if you're not currently a speaker, just request for permission to speak, and I will allow you to do that.
I mean, I guess I'll speak. I mean, I kind of touched on this before, right? Like, that is literally what happened to me. I got this offer, and I knew that it was low, and it was weird the way it was offered to me, right? Because it was kind of like an email, like, "Hey, you got the position. Here's the salary, and now sign." And I'm like, "Oh, I know y'all don't think I'm a fool. Like I know y'all just gonna like try to take the option to negotiate away from me, right?" So you respond to the email, say, "Well, no, let's discuss this. Let's let's reevaluate." And then there I felt that there was a level of disrespect because, as I said, some institutions the salaries are public. So did you not think that I didn't do my research and knew what other people made? You know what I mean? And so I felt that way, but I had to address it, in a respectful manner. Like, well, listen, here's what I think I'm worth, and you either have to match this. You know what I mean? And actually, when I responded, the person above the person who sent me the offer actually contacted me and apologized and said, "Oh, I didn't, I don't know how this happened." And with instances of, and even brought up like discrimination things, that is now the hot topic in all companies, right? And so they apologized and offered me a wonderful salary, right? But you have to stand up for yourself. You have to advocate for yourself because nobody's going to do it, and they will try to get away with whatever they can. And I had to also resolve in my heart that if they wasn't meeting us, I had no problem leaving because I know how valuable I am in these spaces, and as Black people in these data tech research spaces, we are so they need it. This is why this organization is here, right? There is a limited amount of people who look like us in these spaces, and all these companies want to talk about diversity. Well, if you want this diversity, y'all need to pay us. So that was my little rant. Sorry.
Hi, Dr. Jones. Thank you for sharing. Also, thank you, Auntie Kim, for helping. My phone died because Twitter Spaces does not work with Android. But my share about this is this has happened to me twice before. And the first time I did not know better, but the second time, the thing that I've learned to do is ask questions. Is basically I ask questions to make them be very specific about what they mean when they say this is what we think you should have. So for instance, if I know somebody offered me $15 an hour to teach last week, and I was like, well, that left me speechless. But for example, if when this lady, we were on the phone, and I have taught at boot camps, I was a teaching assistant, I was a graduate student, I've taught kindergarten, middle school, all of that. So, and it's all up on my LinkedIn. And she said, well, we looked at your profile and we thought you'd be a good fit. This is what this would be like. This is all the tasks. And this is what the pay is. And then I let them finish and I said, so with this pay, have you considered that I bring this and this and this experience? Did you factor that into your pay? Also, is this what you also pay your teaching assistants and your instructors? So like, I made sure that the burden of proof was not on me to show why I should get that. I let them answer the question of, if I offered you this, but in a diplomatic way, would you take it? Would you take what you're offering me right now, given all the experiences you so say that you know I have from now research I know you didn't do? It's like if somebody were to criticize a report, instead of them just saying, oh, this is bad, doesn't fit, I would say, could you explain exactly what feedback you have that you think I could have made this better with? So it forces them to really think about what they're doing and not just tell you a number and let you sit with it. And also to the point of practicing, I'm a very shy and reserved person. So I try to practice being quiet after I say something so that I don't have to explain myself. Like, for example, if I were to drop a number, practicing the silence, being okay with the silence and letting them respond. It's very powerful, so you don't talk yourself out of something. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
That is an excellent point about silence. Wow. And I'm the opposite personality wise from UC, as you well know. And that took me a long time to master. But you drop your number and then it goes silent. And I've learned I could go silent until forever. And that's all strategy. That's all a tactic that is used when you're negotiating money. Eventually someone will say something, but it won't be me. It'll be, I'll drop my number and then wait. And then we wait. So there's some power in that. Okay, Sia, so where are we with the agenda for this evening? I think we kind of...
Cool. That's a good question. So we didn't really talk about things. We have been talking about things we should do, but we haven't really touched on things we shouldn't do when we are negotiating, weighing options, even before you weigh options, applying for things. So do you all have like lesson learned things that you would not say people should do in their process? And it
So
can't be not negotiate. That cannot be the answer because we're talking about you should.
I'm sorry, was somebody else speaking? Okay. All right. So I will start off. What I would say not to do is not to mention money first. And if for some reason you do, don't give an exact number, give a range. And make sure that the number that you really want falls, excuse me, within that range. That would be my advice.
Thank you. Anyone else? And to the point of not giving a number, I don't know if any of you said this, but also another way to ask the question of a number is to ask for the budget, not necessarily what they would pay people, because we know they will offer people lower than what they have, but what the budget for the position itself is, because they set money aside that they say this person's benefit and their comp and their bonus and everything is going to be this. So that is something else to do. And also, I would negotiate your title. This is something we don't talk about a lot, but do not negotiate your title or ask how it changes. So, I mean, a lot of the time we're like, oh, I want to get the job and just be at the job. But I had this job, which I was at for 3 years, and my job title was global compensation processor. But my day-to-day was SQL and Python and product meetings and automating reports, setting up warehouse triggers, all of those things. But you wouldn't know it if you went to LinkedIn and saw that, because it doesn't have the word data in it, and it doesn't have analyst, any of those things. So don't, if you see the job title and you don't think it makes sense, don't let that go. Ask about it. That would be my piece of advice. Dr. Jones, I see you're unmuted. I'm not sure if you wanted to add to that.
I didn't know I was unmuted, but I mean, I think we've all heard the horror stories of people asking for like astronomical things, right? And then the offer gets rescinded, and I think that's just a sign of well, you give the impression that you came in unknowledgeable. And so I kind of like the individual, I think he said, if they give you a number, ask for about 15 or makes it 15 to 20% more. And I think that that's a good practice. I always, and Kimberly said it as well. She said, give them a range, but have the number you actually want within the range. And so that's kind of the strategy that I use. I give them higher than what I want so that I can actually get what it is that I want. And you usually end up making out better in that way and getting more than what you actually wanted.
That's a good one. And also, on that note, do not give the last salary you had, please. Do the 15% and then start. Hannah, hello.
Let me just jump in real quick. So there are I've gone through some application processes where they will not let you get further in the application unless you list your salary. Right? So for completing it online, you have to put a number there. So what I do is put the number 0.
I do that too.
And keep on with the application. Just want to throw that in there.
Yep.
Hey, I just wanted to go off of what Dr. Jones said. So this isn't not what not to do, but earlier I had asked about the question about salary ranges and my issues with that. And then I saw an article that said that New York City is now, like, by law, they're supposed to put the salary ranges in the job applications. I don't know if anyone else can confirm that, but I would say that New York and Washington, D.C. area where I'm from are pretty comparable. So actually, and if anything, New York City might pay more, which would be to my benefit. So I might just look at, the job title, whatever job I'm looking for, and just put those ranges. So I just wanted to share that solution. Yeah.
Yeah, that in Colorado, because that's been effective for a while. So you can, what I do is I look at if they are a company that has offices in Colorado, I go to the Colorado posting. I take that number, and then there is online, there is cost of living adjustment website. I think NerdWallet is one of them. And you can see the index of, you can compare the two locations. Like if I have 50,000 in um, Colorado, what does that translate to for me to have the same life in DC? And then you can that multiplier to see where you might fall. Let's see. Jarrett, let's add you. See you requested. Jarrett, welcome back to the stage. Do you want to add something?
That's right. It's like connection issue. I don't have anything to add as of right now, but but definitely glad to be back.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's really mostly what we wanted to talk about is the how, why, and what not to do. And if anyone would like to add to those things, please come up. Or if you would like to ask questions about a specific scenario you want a little bit more clarity on, we encourage you to ask.
I do have a specific question to the scenario I'm in. So I am a contractor, and I may be switching, depending on how the contract works out, I might be switching to another team that's under a different contracting organization. So I'm just wondering, like my situation might be a little different than everyone else, but like assuming you're doing the same work, how would you handle switching within different contracting organizations?
So that actually happened to me when I was a government contractor. It actually happens quite a bit. I think it depends on, there were two scenarios. The first one, I switched basically from being a data scientist on one project to being a data scientist on another. And there wasn't much change in the role. The second one, I actually switched from, well, I actually didn't stay, well, so they wanted to switch me from one role to another role, but the second role was significantly more work and required more skill. And I asked for more money and it was turned down. So when my current contract ran out, I moved on with life. So those are two different scenarios and two different ways of dealing with it. So I think it depends, I guess, which doesn't really help.
Thank you.
Hannah, could you say a little bit more about what you want out of the move, out of the switch? Was it like this is the natural progression of this contract, or did you come up on it and then you were like, oh, I want to do this after this is up?
I'm still deciding. It would make more sense, and I think I would make a much higher salary if I left and did something different. But I do like the work. I'm more so thinking about, you know, again, it's a unique situation that I'm the only one in a different organization, and everyone else on my team is in a different organization. So just like pay equity, so making sure that I'm making the amount that they're making, even though it's a different organization and I don't really know. So yeah, it's just kind of making sure that salaries align. But most likely if I left, I would probably make more.
Do you know anyone on the new team?
I do, but I have the feeling that most people don't like talking about salary, and I am uncomfortable asking people that I'm not friends with about salary. So I prefer to just do outside research, and then if I can't figure it out, just kind of, ask for an amount that I like. But yeah, that's a whole other conversation within itself, is asking their coworkers or how to ask your coworkers their salary, because it's really uncomfortable. I don't know if people see it differently.
Yeah, so you are on Twitter. Something else you could do is just say, hey, does anyone work at this place? I have a question. Like if you have because sending a DM is different, like, than being on a conversation with a Zoom. Is that something you would be open to?
I mean, if it means, reaching out to network, I think I can definitely do that. On social media, I'm still a little, iffy about that, but I can see how that would be helpful. And I'm sure you'd get a lot of positive feedback. But yeah, maybe in the industry I'm in, I'm a little more reserved.
Mm-hmm.
But assuming I move into, tech or more private sector, then I think I'd be open with, speaking to a lot of different people and getting their feedback.
And that's a real good point, Hannah, because when you're in a space that requires a clearance, you really can't do the social media thing when it comes to trying to get information. That's something to also think about when you're doing government contracting and negotiating, that a lot
Yes.
you can't even say you work there, right? There's some
Exactly. This is why I'm being very vague.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
And
not helpful.
And I thought, yeah, I know that vagueness very well. So yeah, you can't always do it that way. You kind of have to find some. I just would start with just basic research, Glassdoor salaries, Indeed salaries, map that to the job requirements, and go from there. That's how I would do it in that situation.
There is also a website that I don't remember who shared it or where it is, which shows how much the government pays contractors for different codes per hour. Now, if anyone knows where that is, that would be a very helpful, because then it shows you like what your company gets paid for your time. So it gives you a gauge for how much you can take out of that bucket. Is this making sense? I know I've asked about this before.
I know exactly the document you're talking about. Let me just throw this number out there for anyone else that might be interested in being a government contractor, data scientist level. Companies or organizations that hire data scientists, the last I saw that document, that was 2 years ago, I think, they pay the company $250,000 a year for you to work with them. And what the company does is negotiate your salary from that. Now that was 2 years ago. So now that number is probably more like 275. So with that in mind, use that information based, again, on your education level, on your experience, and on your skill set to gauge how much you think you ought to be paid, with the idea that they're going to try to pay you the lowest amount possible. But that's what the whole point of this conversation is. Probably the most important thing, and I think you mentioned this, Sia, to never not negotiate. You always negotiate the salary because they're lowballing you with the first offer. And I think the second thing I would say, getting back to the list of things you shouldn't do, is you shouldn't bring money up first, is the other, I think, don't. And you should not prepare. You have to do your research. You have to research the company. You have to research the area salaries. You have to research the salaries in the area you live in, so that when you go to the table to talk about money, you're prepared. Does anyone else want to chime in with the don't?
I just want to follow up with something I think Hannah mentioned, but I would also think about how badly do you really want to stay at your current company, because I was a government contractor and I wanted to stay there because I really liked my coworkers and everything. But, I wasn't sure my contract would get extended, so I started looking for another job and they offered me a new contract. But then the new job, the contract was like $40,000 more, and I was like, I can't justify staying because $40,000 is a whole lot more money. So I would think about that too. That keep looking for other jobs, even if you really like your current employer.
And that brings up a good point, and we're going to try to wrap it up in the next couple of minutes, that most of the time, in my experience of over 30 years of working, if you want to increase your salary, you have to go outside your current organization. I've never understood how that makes sense. You get, everybody gets a cost of living adjustment every year, but it's often more financially advantageous to go to another company than to stay at your current one. And when I say advantageous, I'm talking about what potentially could be life-changing money. $40,000 a year, that's getting pretty up there, with the idea that that's life-changing money, with the idea that the average Black American family only makes $45,000 a year. That's a family. So that could be substantial. So that's something else to keep in mind, that for the most part, if you want to jump into another pay range, you might have to leave the organization you're with. And that's why you may just decide to get comfortable where you are, which is kind of what I've done. They match us, 100% with 401k, and we get, 5-figure plus, really solid 5-figure bonuses. So I think at this point in my career, it's a little different. But for some of you younger folks, if I were you guys, I would be hopping around like a bunny rabbit every 2 years. And every time I jump, it'd be 30K, 40K, 50, until you get to a point where you're kind of at the top of your field. But it's a little different than it was, when I was younger. Company situations are very different than they are now. Every 2 years, I would be stacking chips like you'd never seen. All right.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I know we were going to wrap up, but Draco, you had waiting for a while. Did you have a question? Was it covered?
Hey, I did have a question. I've finished a security clearance process for a federal agency, and it's taken about a year. And my contingent offer was set at one, step in grade. And I'm literally right now, as I'm listening to this, I've been typing this response to them, asking for them to basically bring me in on my current salary. I'm coming from being a consultant into the federal government. And I was wondering if anyone has ever been successful with renegotiating or revisiting after a security clearance process, because they usually take they're usually lengthy depending on the level that you end up getting cleared for.
So are you saying you accepted a position at one amount, and now that the security clearance process has gone on, you want a different amount?
Yeah, I did accept the position at one amount. It was contingent upon me getting a clearance, and that was about a year ago. But since then, I've had another role, and so since I'm coming in with additional experience, additional credentials, I think I'm going to, not think I'm going to ask them to reconsider my salary. And I was wondering if anyone has been successful at doing that with a federal agency before.
I actually don't have any experience with that. I think that to me is a little tricky, because even though I understand that you did get this additional experience, you agreed to the offer. And so I think that's I'm a little on the fence on that one, because for me, knowing the process takes a year and knowing that you would get experience, probably the better thing to do would have been to say, hey, this isn't going to come through until next year. In a year, I'm going to have this certification complete and this much more experience. So let me go in above with that idea, and they asked me why. That's the justification I would have given them. I think because security clearance jobs are so hard to come by, and generally they compensate super well. I probably am, 51% wouldn't rock the boat. I would just roll out with whatever unless it was just way under what it should have been. I would stick with what they already have, with the idea that once you get that clearance in a data career, you're going to always have options. So if it doesn't work, you move on to something else. But I think that for me, 51% of me would stick with, because we'd already negotiated that number. And then 49% of me says I would ask them differently. But I don't know if anyone who has experiences with that.
I have a question. Do you have spot bonuses or anything like that?
You said, do I have bonuses?
Like spot bonuses, like you complete this project, you get this bonus. Is there sort of a structure at that organization?
At my current organization, or going into the federal agency?
The federal agency.
No, nothing like that in place that I know of, or that they've told me.
Okay, because that was gonna be my only suggestion, is like, if it's already signed, is the next review period talking about a spot bonus for your added experience.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for this advice. I'm definitely gonna consider it.
Thank you for joining, and welcome. I see you unmuting to already introduce them. I'm gonna be quiet.
No, I wonder if Pierre has an opinion. I don't know if you heard the question, Pierre, about you signed a contract to agree to be compensated at a certain level while waiting for the clearance process to go through. The clearance process has gone through, and now there's a question. Draco wants to know, should he ask for more money? having a previous degree, but then now he has more experience. He's bringing more to the table. And I wonder, Pierre, your decades of experience, if you have any opinion on that.
Hi, good. So let me make sure I understand. There was he did the interview. There's I guess a set salary, and then there's, I guess, a processing period. But he's asking, can he still go back and ask for a higher salary? Am I understanding that correctly?
Right. What makes it special is that it's the government system, right? So this is a position that requires a clearance, and a year and a half, I think, is what I went through. But anyway, it can take a long time. And so in that time, he's increased his skill set. He's got some other things he's bringing to the table, and he's asking if he should go back and try to negotiate for a higher salary. Did I capture that correct?
Yeah, I'm basically gonna ask them to match my current salary. It was only be a couple. It'd only be a couple steps, a couple step increases at this point.
And
Not a couple, but
and Drico, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
yes.
You said it's a government position, basically. So is it if I can ask, is it something particularly with military, or is it something more civilian?
Is it military or civilian? Intelligence community, military, I suppose.
Gotcha. Okay. It's a good question. I remember from my days at Lesco, I would say my gut says that you should be able to, but I think the challenge would be, I'm very vague on this, so I'm probably about maybe 10 years out of date. But if I recall correctly, I always thought the idea was, and also I'm thinking in terms of contracting too, so I may be clouding the answer. But I would think that, I think at each level, if you have extra skill sets and you can match it to a particular level, within the agency or within the department that you're working with, you might be able to make a strong argument rather than just saying that, I have the extra skills. It might be an argument, and I'll be really basic about it. Let's say that if they had you at level 2, and let's say that you reviewed your skills and you know that those skills are things that look for maybe a level 3. That might be a good argument that you can make, at least. They can give a try. I mean, the worst they could probably say is no, we can't do it. But at least you framed it in such a way where they know that they can understand the reason why you're asking, so to speak, if that makes some sense.
It does. It does.
Yeah, the reason why I say that, I was a government contractor. It was like for 3 years, and we used to set our salaries for the contracts. We have to sit down and say, here's specialist 1, specialist 2, and each person's at a particular level. And I can't even remember how the levels are anymore. But I know, and we were closer to the military because it was more like a logistics contractor. So each time that we had to go through a contract, we had to identify who the specialist was, and then we have to specify what level. And I think if I remember correctly, each level, there's some correlation between experience and in terms of skill, but that it just varies basically. But I think if you're dealing with the intelligence community, I would think that you would have a same structure or similar structure. Do you have somebody who's mentoring you through this, or somebody that you can probably maybe even ask, like, what sort of level structure that they have?
Not at the particular agency, no. But I do have someone that I could tomorrow that I'm speaking with, that I'm going to also ask the same question to.
Yeah, there's something there. I just kind of would, I'm not, like I said, I may be even speaking out of turn, but I would think that my gut feeling is yes, ask for it, always ask for as much as you can, obviously. But the question is always about how you frame something when you approach people. And in this case, if you're with a government, I'm pretty sure there's different levels for each specialist or each manager that they hire and bring in. So you need to match up to that. So.
All right.
I hope that helps.
No, it definitely does help. Thank you.
And my apologies for not introducing Pierre. Is one of our mentors for Black Tides, a very valuable member of our organization. So thank you for dropping by.
Thank you for being patient with me. I kind of we had snow up here, and unfortunately I got stuck coming back. So I apologize. I was trying to kind of race and see if I could catch into this. So glad to be here.
Thank you. So is there anyone else that would like to ask any specific questions, or do any of the Black Tides members or others want to share any experiences? We are going to start wrapping things up for this evening. I want to thank everybody in advance for participating. Dr. Jones?
So actually, I have a question. looking at resources online to compare salaries, has anybody come across the H-1B visa salary website? And I think that information is reliable. So if you were trying to get a range of salaries in like pharmaceutical companies or tech companies, they might have data there that you could go from. Has anybody checked this out or looked into this?
I use it sometimes to look at salaries
Mhm. Same, because
and like levels, FYI, and some like blind, I think.
yeah, blind is yeah, it's a mess. But yes, you should just look at the numbers and not the words.
Oh, great, thanks. I didn't know how accurate it was.
I would also say, because we were talking about Glassdoor a lot, a friend of mine told me, he said, at least for our company, Glassdoor is at least 15% lower than what it actually ends up being. So add like 10 to 15% to the Glassdoor number. They say pay scale is more in line with the numbers compared to Glassdoor. So for what it's worth. TW, you joined us as a speaker. Do you have a question or a point?
Hey, sorry, this was a while ago when I believe Hannah was speaking about her switching contracts. Um, so all I've ever done, I've never been a direct federal employee. All I've ever done was contract, and I've never seen any raise within a position besides basic like annual merit increases. All of my raises that I've gotten have been either getting an offer letter from another company, and leveraging that for a raise, or through just getting another position altogether. So somebody said it correctly. Like you're probably gonna have to leave your company to get that raise you're looking for. But that was all.
Thank you. How you think?
Yeah, I just want to I think is it Drico's I think it's a good point that he presented, and I just wanted to add to it by I don't have a security clearance, but I do know two people around me who have security clearance, and one thing that I've gathered from that is that they're very expensive. So the fact that your current employer invested a year for you to obtain that clearance, even though you didn't have to physically pay for it, there's a dollar amount that's attached to it. So let's say you decided, like Kim was saying, like if you're happy at your current company, you stay cool until you're not happy anymore and you leave. Your next employer now doesn't have to pay for your clearance anymore. So let's say it costs 100,000 to pay for a clearance, just hypothetically, right? You can go 50,000 above your ask because now they don't have to dish out 100 for someone new to get their clearance all together. So I definitely wanted to mention that, and it brings me to another point that a lot of times when we look at compensation and negotiation, we focus a lot on the salary portion of things, but there's other things that come into play when you think about your total compensation package. Whether the organization pays for conferences are expensive. I know, like at my old employer, my manager in the first 90 days dropped 15 grand on SQL and other type of trainings for me to upskill. So like those things also come into play. I know some other members have mentioned PTO. Like me, one thing for me, whenever I see unlimited P mentioned on a job application, I do not apply because there's no value with unlimited PTO. What that means to me is that we're going to work you and you're probably not going to have time to use your unlimited PTO. And when you do decide to leave, we're not going to cut you a check for unlimited PTO. And I
Yes.
keep forgetting to land my plane.
Thank you for landing it. So to that point, Odane, I would tweak it a little bit. I would say if you apply, at least 5 weeks is a good gauge. And I had trouble with this before, but like I was told 5 weeks is a good like max to say, I'll take days off up to 5 weeks if you apply. But yes, you do not get money when you leave because 0 times unlimited is equal to 0. So do we have any other notes before we wrap up and say thank you for spending all this time with us?
One quick one I'll add, and I don't know if anyone's talked about this much before. Just a lot. So I apologize, I was a little late for this. I know that this is probably a great group where everyone talked about real specific tips and advice. But I would say one thing I'm glad that LinkedIn and is around, because when I left Ford, it was harder for me to get in contact with people who probably were still good resources even after leaving a company. Don't be afraid. I heard someone mention earlier about a lot of times when you get your negotiations, sometimes easier when you leave a company, and that's kind of been true. And I'm sure that's what I heard when I was at Ford, and this is going back to the '90s. So I would say that, but at that time it was harder to network with people. So I would say one cherry on top of all of this is keep your LinkedIn up to date. Check in with people. Say hello. How you doing? Are you stuck in the snow like I was earlier today? But what you want to do is make sure you want to build your network such that you build it within your company, and then sometimes people do leave. You'll hear me say this a lot of times that as much as we talk about allies and everything else, people do move on and leave for a lot of reasons. That doesn't mean that they're not willing to help you. It just means that you may need to make sure that they are in your circle. Grab even if it's for 5 seconds, say, hey, I still would love to keep in contact with you, because you never know how those people will help. When I left Ford, just to give you the idea, when I got to Intel to intern, I actually ran into a few people from Ford Motor Company. And this was, let's see, I left about 2001. This is about maybe, it wasn't later to like 2005 or so. And some of those people, I was surprised, but it was basically Intel liked Ford Motor Company because people had, project management skills from engineering, and processors are a little different than cars. But the good thing is that it allowed me to kind of connect with people. LinkedIn makes it, has been around for a while, and just makes it a lot easier for you to follow up with people and connect. So do not sleep on that resource at all. And I'll land my plane here.
Okay, Sia, do you want to wrap us up?
Hi, sorry, my my screen was frozen for a little bit. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight and to evening for those on the West Coast, and to morning to everyone who joined from everywhere. Thank you so much. Next week we will be having a rehashing of health care careers in data. So please join us there. It will be at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll have that on. And if you have any questions, please reach out. If you have interest in participating in Black Ties, please let us know. But thank you so much for your time. There are so many spaces going on. So thank you for being in this one. And have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for your time. There are so many spaces going on, so thank you for being in this one. And have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.